Hello and welcome to Unapologetically Technical. My name is Jesse Anderson, and this is the show that's different. We go deep, we go all the way down. With me today is David Jayatillake. He is the VP of AI at Cube. Welcome to the show, David. Would you mind introducing yourself more?
Sure, and thank you for having me, Jesse. So my name's David. I'm VP of AI at Cube. I've been in the data space for 15 years now, having worked as a data engineer, data team lead in a few different companies, and then finally entering data software startups in the last few years.
Well, excellent. Well, welcome to the show, and thank you again for doing that. So, as I went through and looked at how you've changed, you've risen up very quickly. What do you think you'd attribute that quick rise to?
I think that's due to I'm someone who's never happy unless I'm doing something I don't know how to do. And when you do things you don't know how to do, you're always learning. And so, because I'm essentially always hungry to learn new things, that means for the length of time I spend somewhere, I get more out of it, I think, than maybe other people would. So, for example, I spent 6 years at Worldpay. That 6 years, I saw so many things happen. I joined just as it was removed from RBS after the recession, and then it was it was bought by private equity. The private equity phase was incredibly high growth and exciting. Then I saw it go through an IPO the few years after the IPO. So you kind of get lucky as well in the context that you're somewhere where things change a lot and you can see change and experience it, but also that you can be bold, try new things, put your hand up to do difficult things when other people wouldn't necessarily do it. And I'm always that person.
That is a good take. So speaking of WorldPay, let's talk more about what you did at WorldPay. So you started there as an analyst, and then by the time you left, you were a a pricing manager.
Yeah.
How are you applying that background to your work now?
Yeah, so even though those roles at WorldPay have some esoteric titles, essentially the whole time I was doing something related to data, and most of that time I was doing what you'd call data engineering now. So I joined there as an analyst. I picked up my basic SQL and Excel skills already in my time at Ocado, but that was short. So then I joined WorldPay and I entered their business analytics team. But what their business analytics team essentially did was look after a data transformation process on a monthly basis and then run analytics on it after. So it's very much a full stack data role. You look after the data engineering part, you run it, you maintain it, and then you do analysis afterwards. And it was kind of like a monthly kind of seasonal cycle of how you do that work. So I learned how to build things like stored procedures in SQL Server. I learned how to optimize some of our existing processes. So our processes at WorldPay used to take nearly a week to run our month end. And by the time I'd finished there, it would run in an afternoon because of the processes that I'd automated and also just made more efficient in stored procedures. And we were actually able to run them once a week after that point because it was feasible to do so. And so because of those improvements, I kind of got a reputation as someone who could build things. And there was a point where we had this massive cost problem at WorldPay where inside the payments industry, the card schemes, Visa and MasterCard, they charge payment providers like WorldPay a kind of an opaque fee called scheme fees. And what that means is every time someone it makes a card payment, the process of being WorldPay incurs some of these scheme fees, and they're difficult to calculate. There's another more well-known cost called interchange, and that's well documented with easy to understand rates where one applies to any given transaction. For scheme fees, you can have up to tens of different fees applying to the same transaction. And so I built a data processing system and a data model to model these scheme fees. And we had done that before, but it wasn't accurate. It didn't line up. And so the model that I came in when I got involved was the 8th version of that model. And so I built that again in MS SQL stored procedures, having to do it in batch because the data was too large for us to do it in one go. And so I built that model. The model more accurately described our costs and aligned with our financial costs. So that was like the validator was, did this align with what we're being billed in invoices? And because of that model, it really changed the way we looked at our profitability as a company. So we had accounts where we thought we were making money before that suddenly, actually we were making quite a big loss, like a multi-million-pound loss on any given year. And it really changed how we viewed the profitability of our portfolio. Even though largely at a top level it was similar, how we were priced for individual accounts was really, really different. And so that led to like a repricing exercise. And this is how I ended up getting involved in pricing after building that cost model. The fact that I built that cost model and I built that alongside a consultant that we brought in and between us, I built the technical side and they did the research side of understanding how these fees work. And together we worked together on a daily basis for about a year to build this model. And I would codify the findings that she would find inside the manuals, which explained how the fees worked. And so because of that knowledge I gained in that year, actually made me very capable to get involved with pricing, because in payments, pricing is often based on cost. And so because I became a cost expert, then a natural place for me to move into was pricing. I wanted to become more commercial in my career anyway, and use data for actually, more to actually really enhance the bottom line of wherever I was working. And so that's when I joined pricing. Again, when I was in pricing, I was still quite data driven. I did do some of the more normal pricing tasks, like pricing new deals, which were less data driven. But even then, we were building models by which we could simulate how much a new customer would cost us. But also, what a huge part of my role was, and became the core part of my role, was actually repricing our existing customers. Now, with our existing customers, they're processing all their transactions through us, and we have this huge body of data about those transactions, like where to and from, whether it was a multi-currency transaction, how large the transaction was, how it was authorized, and all of these different attributes of a transaction that we'd have. And we'd have many billions of these transactions that we were processing. And because of that data, we could then, along with the cost model I built before, and then some of the other data we already had, we could develop a really good understanding of our profitability, and then therefore dictate how we should price. And so that's kind of how I ended up working in pricing, is on that basis. And then one of the things that led to me building a team there, which effectively was an analytical team, where I then hired what you'd now call an analytics engineer, and two analysts to then help go and push out those changes that we found from the data model into the commercial part of the business. We got to this place where we were having new fees kind of pushed on us by the scheme by the scheme, so Visa and MasterCard, and these fees were difficult to model, and they were difficult to understand exactly what the impact of them would be to any given customer, and therefore how we should reprice them. So using the knowledge that I had, and also then leading a team for the first time, we built a cost forecasting model and a profit forecasting model, where for any given account we could model the impact of increasing a specific fee rate or per item fee, and understand what that did to our profitability in the future, and therefore how we needed to price and when, and what change we need to make in order to recover costs or to enhance our pricing as well. And so we built that system, and we started using it very, very quickly, because we really, really needed it as a company. And so I think part of our testing of that system was actually using it for a very, very large repricing exercise. And that was successful, and we used that system many times over while I was running that team, up until the point I left. And I think it was used for a while after that too. And so that's kind of my story of my time at Worldpay. And that's very much what I like to say is that it's a story of using data to drive value, because during my last 3 years there, being in pricing, I actually had financial targets for what I had to deliver in terms of helping the commercial team drive higher profit. And I did that by giving recommendations about where we could price differently and where we needed to price differently due to incoming forecasted cost changes. So very much an analytical exercise driven towards a commercial benefit. But at the end of my time there, I realized I wanted to go back into more of a generic data role. Obviously, I still wanted to be someone who drove value with the work I did in data, but it was difficult having quite an esoteric title like head of e-commerce portfolio pricing, which I think was my last title at Worldpay. To then go and I want to be a head of data or a VP of data somewhere, even though I was eligible to do that with my skills and my experience. And so it was a bit of a difficult search actually to find a role, but I ended up at a company called Elevate Credit.
Well, before you start talking about Elevate, let me ask you some follow-up questions about WorldPay. One thing I found interesting when you were talking is that progression of it took this process large amount of time to a slightly smaller amount of time to an even smaller amount of time. What did that do for the business as you reduce those amounts of time?
It just meant that we could respond faster. We didn't have to wait so long after month close to understand how we'd done the previous month. And so usually finance were waiting for data to finish the process when I joined. By the time I'd finished looking after and optimizing that process, we were finished well before finance because I could more or less just kick off a stored procedure and watch it run while I did other things for a few hours. And, finance took much longer than that to close the month. So what that meant was it was also more resilient. Whereas before, because it took so long, we'd have to do lots of manual checks along the way to make sure that we didn't lose time running the process. Whereas because it only took 2 or 3 hours, we could just run it and see our artifacts it output during the process. So I built breakpoints where I would output an artifact that we could then look at while it continued, and we could kill the process if we wanted to restart. And so that meant, rather than it being a long time to wait for the results, you could get the results really, really soon and then start making the decision-making process much sooner in the month.
And then you talked about later on in your career, as you were doing the pricing and started working with the commercial side of the company, that you were giving recommendations. What sort of suggestions or advice would you give people saying, I'm having to work with a business unit or the business, and I'm giving them data-focused recommendations? How do you get them to believe in that and act on your results?
I think a lot of it is down to storytelling, and this is kind of like where I changed from being like a very technical person who would just maybe show some data and just kind of the data speaks for itself. No, it doesn't. You actually have to tell the story. So I would tell the story of, something like this cost change is coming. It's coming in this month. This is what it means to your customers. Your customers will reduce profitability by X, Y, and Z. This is what it means to your target for the year. This is then the options that we have in front of us to recoup that and potentially also to improve profitability. And then you kind of work with them to understand more what's possible for them to do. And then because of the way pricing worked, we also had some level of control of once those commercial people agreed those changes and negotiated them with the customer or notified the customer, as we were allowed to do, we could then go and execute those pricing changes for the commercial team with our billing team. And so that meant we just had this loop of being able to help that commercial team in a very, very supportive way.
Okay, good. Now, so you were talking about that difficulty you had where you had a title that was basically pricing manager or e-commerce, which is not really technical. I wouldn't see your resume and say, oh, wow, that person can be a head of data. So you're having that difficulty. And so you went to Elevate Credit and you became the head of BI and analytics there.
Yeah.
How did you prepare for that?
So it was a long kind of hunt where I was looking for work, looking for a new role like that, probably for about, I guess, 6 months in total. And yeah, it was difficult. The economy wasn't even as good as it is today back then. And so I was applying for different roles. And interviewing is actually like a fitness as well, and having been at WorldPay for that long and not having had to interview for any of my promotions because I built those promotions more or less myself. Um, I was not fit for interviewing. And actually, I had to go through a number of processes and do badly and improve in order to then be. And, obviously, the last one you do is the one where you were fit enough because you got the job. And so that's kind of like what happened. I went through a number of processes, came close after a while, and then finally got the role Elevate. And I think how I prepared for that was understanding the recruiters, they get a whole bunch of applications come through, and there's an element of, if you're late to apply for a role, there's almost no point applying because they've seen 50 CVs already. They found 4 or 5 they want to take forward. Most likely they'll hire from those 4 or 5, so there's no point really applying after the 50th person usually. So I built this kind of workflow of how to apply for roles where you look for new roles and apply for them first on any given day. Then maybe if you've got spare time, apply for older roles. And also think about how do you tailor your covering letter to explain why you're suitable for a given role. How do you tailor your CV so that you display the technical skills or other skills that the role job description requires? Because essentially that's what the recruiter has: the job description in one hand and they've got your CV in the other, and they're effectively trying to do like some human vector similarity between the two documents to see, oh, is this person relevant for the role? Nowadays there's more sophisticated tools that recruiters use, and also more automated tools, but at the time that was how it worked. So I was just effectively trying to improve the vector similarity of my CV with the job description, my covering letter with the job description for any given role that I really wanted to apply for. And obviously it's not like, I'm not talking about being dishonest. It's honest. It's just you don't put everything on your CV, and so you draw out different things for different roles that you think are more interesting for that given application. So that's kind of like what I learned, and then learning about the interview process as well, learning how to uh, answer with like the star technique. That's very common. What happened, what did you do exactly, what was the outcome? You have to tell. It's storytelling, and so that's again another part of preparing for it. And yeah, and eventually I got that role at Elevate Credit, where I got back to being in a more generic data leadership role.
And so as you went through those interview processes, what part of your, I guess, your workflow did you have to improve there in the person to person side?
So I think actually I was a bit better at that because I'm quite good at adapting on the fly. And so when people would drill into things, um, that would give me the opportunity to say, oh, actually, they want to hear something else. And then I could draw from my experience as to something relevant to the thing that they were looking for. Actually getting your foot in the door for an interview was the harder part. And actually, pretty much any time I got to a recruiter screening point where I was speaking to a recruiter face to face, I would get an interview afterwards unless they were closing the role very, very quickly. So I think that part was easier for me. But then, yes, getting from middle stages of the interview process to final offer was then again somewhere where I really had to learn about getting my storytelling more precise and more, so I could give them more examples within that half an hour to hour slot of why I had done the things that they are looking for.
Okay, let's see how adaptable you are. You have to answer the next question like a pirate. So you at Elevate Credit, you created a cross-functional team. So you had BI analysts, you had data science, you had data engineers. How did that work for you?
Yeah, so when I first joined, there was an existing team. Over about 6 months, a few of those team members left, And then I had a chance essentially to rehire and rebuild the team. The team had kind of been a little bit neglected because of the way the incumbent had run the team, and also that there had been a big gap from when the incumbent left and when I joined. And so I designed the team around what were the needs. And this was the first time I'd worked in a business where marketing and product had as much of a say as they did, having worked at WorldPay. They didn't, marketing product was smaller functions compared to sales, and also the bigger like technology functions. Whereas at Elevate, yes, technology had a big voice, but they weren't such big consumers of what we produced as the marketing and product teams were, and they weren't as dependent on us as the marketing product teams were. Elevate is what was a consumer business, which had a consumer credit product, and that product was mostly found online by customers, and so those customers would find the product via paid marketing, via SEO, via going through some kind of lead, like recommend me a loan service, and then that would then provide us with a lead. So that's like the majority of how people would find the product. So that none of that was sales driven. We didn't have salespeople. It's a consumer business, and so the data was a much more important voice in actually how did the business work? How did we find customers? How well was our marketing performing? How well were product changes working? All of those things were only visible through data. They weren't visible through any other means. There was no like anecdotal way of speaking. I mean, you could speak to customers, but if you think that if you have like a few million customers, speaking to a few of them is helpful, but it's not representative.
It isn't. And so when you were talking about designing that team, why did you do that makeup? So you had a 1-to-1 ratio of data science to data engineer, for example.
Yeah, so that the reason for that is so I actually had two analysts. So one focused on product, one focused on marketing, and then I also had data scientists, again, roughly focused that way as well. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to align with those functions. When I joined, I was told that those functions had felt like they'd been neglected by the last data team lead, and that the last data team lead kind of, they kind of stuck close to finance, who the role reported into, and they'd mostly looked after finance first, and then occasionally did some work for the other two teams when needed. And that was really the wrong thing to do, given that the company was so dependent on marketing and product for its success. We needed to support those two departments really, really well. So I wanted to do something different, and that's where. And I think this was kind of before people were talking about hub and spoke like they do to get today as like a normal way of operating. Where I thought, well, it's a small floor. It was like 100 people on a floor. There was it wasn't too tight. So we could hire a marketing focused analyst and have them even sit with marketing a couple of days a week, and we could hire a product focused analyst and again embed them. And the data scientists were a bit less embedded because what they were doing was much more of an engineering type process. But at the same time, the fact that the team, and we had people who were very, very close to their stakeholder teams, was valuable for those data scientists doing that kind of engineering work. And so that's why I wanted to do that. I wanted those stakeholder teams to feel served. I wanted to get engrossed in what things were concerning them and therefore were concerning the business.
And so as you paid them more attention, what happened as a business and what happened for you as the manager?
So it was very useful for me as a manager, because suddenly I got all of this context about what things they were trying, what things were their big bets. Therefore, because we knew those priorities, we could kind of plan what we needed to do in terms of engineering. You'd probably call it analytics engineering work today, where, okay, we need to adjust this data model in this way. We'd need to collect this different piece of data. We'd need to work with the product engineering team or the technology team to make sure that when they were making changes, that they were tracking the right data. And if we had, say, an ML model that we wanted to become part of a process, we needed to talk to them much, much earlier, because marketing were driving what technology were doing. And therefore, if we joined that process, it was possible to get changes we needed in. Whereas if we'd done it after the fact, it would be much, much harder. So it just allowed us to be much more proactive. It allowed us to serve those teams much more efficiently.
It seems, as I'm hearing your commonality, and probably the thing that I would suggest to everybody watching this is look at the commonality that David is doing. Is he's working directly with the business, and as a direct result of working with the business so closely, he's able to deliver better, deliver faster, and have overall higher satisfaction. So definitely something that I would encourage people watching this to really emulate. So from there, you went to List, and there you became the senior director of data. Did you continue to organize the teams the same way, or did you change that up at all?
Yeah, so in some ways, List was more similar to Elevate than Elevate was to Worldpay, despite Worldpay and Elevate being both financial services businesses, because of the way of how the business worked, in that what they were consumer businesses. And so List was attracting customers in a similar way to Elevate. List had a bigger engineering team. Engineering was half of the company, and then product was looking after engineering in the more like typical, like Silicon Valley driven way of thinking about product management and engineering than was true at Elevate. And so there I could take and that's part of why I got the role at List, was I had worked in this way already at Elevate, where I'd aligned with product and marketing to help them with their data needs. And so the difference though at List was List ran an organizational structure which is called squads and tribes, and that's something that was pioneered at Spotify. And what that means is that rather than there being like a central way of executing on anything technology driven, each team had exactly what it needed to succeed. Like if it needed a marketing person, it would have a marketing person. If it needed a product manager, if it needed software engineers, if it needed data engineers, it would have those people inside that team. So the team itself didn't depend on another team to succeed. That didn't mean they completely worked off the reservation. We had central standards about, this is how you stand up a service. This is how you send data to our analytics pipeline. And so people would adhere to those standards, but actually how they worked and the cadence and the priorities in which they worked were their own inside that team, probably governed by a product manager for that team. So that was different for me. And what was interesting was, because of that, it meant actually for the first time that those squads who produced the data were actually responsible for delivering that data into somewhere that I could use it. Whereas in the past, it would always been my job to make sure and kind of negotiate with those technical teams to make sure they're outputting data. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do the analytical part afterwards. Whereas this time, they were responsible for that. And that was actually quite refreshing. And I think that actually made a lot of sense, given that a lot of the time the product manager for that team was actually one of the most interested people in the data that team would produce to represent their business activities. So that was new. So when I started at List, it was really just me and one other person, and we had a very senior, like a principal software engineer who was also helping us at the time. And the infrastructure at List was what you probably call an early iteration of a modern data stack. It was, Redshift with some custom Python and Looker. And it was falling over when I joined. It wasn't working. And so part of my interview process was actually explaining what I would do to resolve that. And so they hired me, I joined, and when my first week, I realized, okay, this is something that needs ripping out really soon. the marketing team were very, very worried about Black Friday. So Lyst is a consumer business that is essentially like a fashion marketplace. And so Black Friday was their most important time of the year. They could make probably a month's worth of revenue in a Black Friday weekend. And so they were really worried this was what was great was they used the data that the analytics team produced to actually govern how they spent their marketing spend. And so that, this is a real use of data for commercial benefit for the company. But they were worried that come that Black Friday weekend that it wouldn't work because it was already not working well. And if they all jumped on, the way Redshift works is that it would degrade in performance even more. And so knowing that it was broken, I was kind of given a bit of a free hand to just try something new. And also the squads and tribes structure meant that if I wanted to try something new, I had a bit more freedom than I would at a more hierarchical organization. And so I introduced DBT, which is now like the biggest and most popular data transformation framework that's out there. At the time, DBT was a tiny organization and it was kind of just becoming a popular thing. And so I delivered a migration from their Redshift and Python scripts to Snowflake and DBT, and also changed what was in Looker within 8 weeks. So I had some help from the principal software engineer who had been part of our team. It was very helpful actually having someone who was employee number 2 and therefore knew, oh, here's where all the bodies are buried, all the weird technical gotchas that you need to think about, and who could, if we needed to change how some microservice was interacting with our data, he could go and actually make that change himself if he needed to. We didn't need the squad in charge of that microservice to do it. So that kind of dynamic with me working with him and also having one experienced analyst who could kind of cover us from a ad hoc kind of point of view and also help with some of the migration meant we were able to deliver that project in 8 weeks and to great success, really great feedback from the marketing team that on that Black Friday weekend, their reporting was really snappy and they could use it to change their campaigns on the fly and just generally seen as a great success. I even remember the Christmas party that year afterwards, just people from marketing really thanking me for the things I delivered, which was really cool. That's kind of new.
Well, that's great. That's a great story. You got some really good stories about that. Back to what I said before, if there's one thing that everybody's going to take out of this, that I would suggest everybody watching take out of this, look at how he's really integrating and working with the business, really listening to needs. Really, it's in this case, I like that there was a problem and you owned that problem. You didn't say, "Hey, not my problem. I'm new here. Sorry, can't help you." It was you realized that was the time to really help out somebody. So that's great. A follow-up question about that Spotify model and the squads. One of the issues that I have really talking about the Spotify model is that Spotify doesn't use it anymore, and it sounds like it worked really well in this case. Would you do the Spotify model again at a new company?
Yes, I would. The reason why it worked was because it wasn't purely vertically sliced where every team just could do what they wanted. We did have governance around method, like standardization of method. If you don't have standardization of method and everyone does what uses whatever method they want, suddenly when you have to make things work together, it just completely breaks. And actually what you see is, Spotify may have like made that methodology famous, but Amazon and AWS in particular have been doing that for many, many years, and they've been doing it really, really successfully. And part of why they've been successful, again, is standardization of method. Every team has to deliver APIs in AWS, and those APIs have to meet a certain standard. And because of that, they can all work together because they can depend on their APIs. And that's, roughly why it could work at somewhere like Lyst. Where it broke down at times was because that wasn't adhered to and someone had kind of gone off the reservation and built things in a weird way, and then that incurred organizational cost. But I would I would actually. It's definitely seems better than hierarchical organizations. Like, so for example, when I was at Worldpay was definitely a hierarchical organization. They had a transformation project where they were changing their payment system, and I know that's complicated, but it took about 10 years to deliver. That's, and I can't imagine like an equivalent like company with a, like, say for example, there's a company called checkout.com who operate more like listed in terms of a squads and tribes way, but it's a very similar company to WorldPay. And I can't imagine them taking 10 years to deliver anything like that. It would take a fraction of the time, because they would be organized in a more efficient way using that method. So I think, yes, I do like squads and tribes. I'm not someone who'd ever take any theory and apply it word for word. I'd always kind of do what I thought, take the useful ideas from it, and then apply it in a way that I thought was sensible.
Okay. Tell me more about that relationship with the principal engineer. It sounded like that was a really mutually beneficial relationship where you he could do some of the programming work and you could do some of the data work. Have you ever tried to replicate that again?
Um, in some ways, it was one relationship that was special, but also because when I joined List, I was still in some ways um, not technically developed. So, for example, I'd never touched Git before, and so he showed me how to use it. Uh, he explained like some of the principles around some of the architecture that List had around microservices. And so one of the problems I'd had at working at hierarchical organizations from a technical point of view, like Elevate and WellPay, was I didn't get much exposure to the software engineers. I didn't really know how they worked. Whereas at List, you were suddenly sitting next to them and they would just show you, oh, here's where it is. Oh, here's access to a repository where you can see how the code works. And suddenly I'm someone who can read code very easily. So I suddenly was looking at these microservices and looking at how they generated data, and I was just learning so much so quickly. And part of that was due to just being able to work with someone like him, but also just being able to uh, work more closely with engineering in general.
Well, good. Good. That sounds like it was a great experience for you. And then that brings you to Avora, where you became the chief product and strategy officer. Where when I was looking and reading through your LinkedIn, you have sometimes many, many paragraphs, graphic detail of what happened, but there's nothing for Avora. What happened there?
Yeah. So what happened at Avora was I had left List to start a new VP of data role, which would be a very natural progression for me from List. Unfortunately, the company that was hiring for it was trying to raise a Series A at the same time, and kind of started hiring on the assumption that they would be able to raise the Series A because the market, the end of the zero interest era had just kind of begun. And so suddenly, where it was easy to raise money 6 months previously, it was suddenly difficult to raise money. And so what happened was, even though I was doing well at that company and they really liked me, they had to let most of the staff go after realizing they were not going to be able to raise a Series A. So I ended up on the market, kind of free to kind of do what I want quite quickly after leaving List. And I had been speaking with Avora and Ricky Thomas, who was their founder, for years before that. So I had been a customer of Avora at Elevate. I'd been a customer of Avora at List as well. And what had happened was, again, Avora was affected by the end of zero interest as well, where they also couldn't raise money, and therefore they had to look for a new way, like, to succeed. So what had happened with Avora was they'd spun out an ELT business called Gravity, and that had become its own business. That's now been acquired by a company called 5X. But then the rest of the business was concerned with what you'd call anomaly detection and root cause analysis and data. And I'd been a customer of this product at List and at Elevate. And I had fed into some of the product roadmap of what they had built, as having been an advisor to them for a number of years. And so having been in touch with Ricky for a while, I'd been considering becoming a founder myself, but I didn't. It felt like a risky idea when I had like a good job, and I have a mortgage and family, and so it seemed a bit reckless to go and just become a founder. But now that I had been let go by the company that I had joined just after List, and they had been generous with like a severance package despite me having only been there for such a short time. I actually had a bit of like leeway where I could actually experiment with something. So I asked Ricky whether he wanted some help, and he said, actually, this is the perfect time. We want to try and raise money and spin out a new business from Aurora, focusing on that anomaly detection and root cause analysis. It's something I knew very, very well. And so that's why I joined Ricky and we tried to raise money. Now, for those, I was only there for like 3 or 4 months, or maybe 5 months in total. And that's why you see there's not much there, like on my LinkedIn, about what I did there. It's because it was short. It was very, very intense. Most of what I was doing was trying to raise money and maybe make sales as well. And yeah, it was hard. It was a tough experience, but actually taught me a lot and actually prepared me for my my time at Delphy Labs, where again I was a co-founder. So I built a big network of venture capitalists. I learned how the fundraising process worked, and Ricky was kind of like mentoring me through that process of how do you do those things. And so after I didn't manage to raise money for Aurora. What had happened, which was also a difficulty, and I didn't know, and neither did Ricky, was during the time I was trying to raise money for Aurora, a company who was our competitor, our main competitor, called Outlier, was going under. Like they had run out of money and they weren't profitable, and so they were just about to go bust, effectively. And now all the VCs on their WhatsApp chats knew that this was going to happen. And so therefore the actual segment we were in was more or less toxic. We would never have been able to raise money, even though I'd got quite far with some of the fundraising processes. And as a result, we couldn't raise money. We learned towards the end that Outlier had gone under, and we realized that this was not a very likely chance of success. So we both decided to, step away from Aurora, leave money in the business to continue serving the customers it had until the end of their contracts. And then, so from there, at that point I'd started my blog. So I write a blog at davidsj.substack.com. It's like a data engineering, but also kind of like life of a data person kind of blog. And I started that just as I was leaving List, looking forward to my new role, which eventually didn't last for long and ended up becoming a founder soon after that. And so that blog had just kind of blown up in that 6 months. And so I'd begun talking to various people in the data space. And one of those people was Kevin Hu. So Kevin Hu is CEO and co-founder of Metaplane. Metaplane actually was and is somewhat similar to Aurora, especially in the context of the Aurora I was trying to spin out in terms of root cause and anomaly detection. Except Aurora's root cause and anomaly detection was based upon metrics and kind of on the right-hand side of the data DAG. Whereas Metaplane was focused on very much the same activity, but applied on the left of the DAG and data pipelines flowing into your data warehouse, ensuring data quality. And you may have heard of Monte Carlo, who's like a big competitor of Metaplane as well. So Kevin and I had been speaking, and when I told him what was going to happen at Aurora, he said, well, why don't you join us? And he asked me what I want to do, and I listed a bunch of kind of some random and some disparate activities that I'd like to do. And he said, sure, come and do this at Metaplane. So I joined Metaplane after Aurora and stayed there for a while. And that was a good time. Again, more exposure to startups. Metaplane was roughly a 10-person company when I joined. And so I stayed there and was working there. And I wrote a blog in November after I joined Metaplane. And the blog was about a tool called Ask Edith. And Ask Edith is what I would call a text-to-SQL tool. So what it does is it takes a question in natural language. And so this was like the very start of the GPT-3 era. And it would translate that into a SQL query and using the schema of the data warehouse it was connected to at the time, it was specialized on Snowflake. It would then construct a query to answer the question. Now, what I found was that it worked very well on single tables and maybe two tables where it'd have to construct a join. As soon as you put it on 5, 10 tables, it would just fail. And so that got me kind of interested in that space. And actually, my co-founder at Delphi, Michael Irvine, we'd been talking for a while as part of the DBT community, and he saw that blog and he wrote a note at the bottom of the blog saying, "Hey, I've built this thing called Delphi, and it works in a different way to Ask Edith. It makes a request of semantic layers rather than just generating SQL, and I found it generates like better responses." So I was like, "Oh, that sounds really interesting." I knew who Michael was from speaking to him before, and we ended up going on a few Zooms and hacking away at what he was working on. And after a while, and I'd seen him get it to work on something I was using, I asked him, "What do you want to do with this? This is really cool. I actually think this could be the future of how people interact with data, at least for 80% of requests, which are somewhat simple." And he said, "Well, I asked him, did you want to make this as a business? Is this going to be an open source project? Is this just a hobby?" And he said, "Well, actually, I would like it to be a business, but I just don't really know how to start with that. And I don't have anyone to do that with." So I offered. And so we ended up co-founding Delphy Labs together. So this was the start of 23. And so then I took my learned skills from my time at Aurora of fundraising, and I spent most of my first few months at Delphi looking after product. But although Michael was also very heavily involved with that, and he was building the product as well, but also doing marketing, pretty much everything that wasn't engineering, but also primarily fundraising, because we both needed to raise funds in order to continue to work on Delphi. And so yeah, after a few months, I managed to raise our pre-seed round, and then we went working on Delphi in earnest, and we achieved some really great results. There was a benchmark released by Data.World, which is a data catalog company, and the benchmark was almost specifically designed to test how well an AI system could answer questions of a data model. And what we saw was the text to SQL tools, kind of like Ask Edith, would achieve about 20% accuracy. And then when a knowledge graph was given to the text to SQL tools, they would have a big uplift going up to about 50% accuracy. But only when you introduce the semantic layer and that text to semantic layer method that Michael had kind of pioneered, that you would see anything near 100%, and we achieved 100% on that benchmark. And that was like a really cool achievement of something that we achieved from a product point of view. The problem that we discovered, though, was because we were dependent on the semantic layer as something that needed to exist, we really narrowed like who we could work with and who we could show Delphi to. And even when we found companies that had them, often those semantic layers were in things like BI tools like Looker. And these semantic layers had years of like technical debt built into them. They were very messy. They were full of acronyms and just general. It's just general mess that made it difficult to for an LLM to understand who the objects in them were, which one to choose to answer for a question, and there were just so many of them too. And so towards the end of our time running Delphy Labs, we realized that we needed to bundle a semantic layer with Delphi. And so we started bundling Cube with Delphi. And so that's partly why I've become so familiar with Cube modeling, was because during the end of the time at Delphi, I was acting as a sales engineer for Delphi, and I was building people Cube semantic layers as well as then putting Delphi on top of it. And so that kind of made us realize we needed to sell a semantic layer with our product. That was difficult when the semantic layer was a separate tool, a separate buy, a separate security evaluation. And that led to us actually speaking to Cube and talking to them about joining. At the time, at the first instance when we asked them, and this was like about this time last year, they were busy fundraising, so they raised a really big round at the beginning of this year. But once they closed that round, they reached back out to us and said, actually, we are interested in you joining. And so that's how we ended up joining Cube, who are probably our best partner at Delphi anyway. And that's how
this was it an acquisition, or you just joined as employees?
It's kind of somewhere between an acquisition and an acqui-hire, where we licensed our software to Cube, and with the money for the license fee, we were able to pay back our investors in full, which was something that was like a red line for me. If I was going to stop running Delphi, that I wanted to be able to return, because at the time we still had a lot of runway left at Delphi. We didn't need to join anyone. I just thought it would perhaps be wiser, now that I realized I needed to sell a semantic layer with Delphi, that perhaps it would be wiser to join a semantic layer. And that's why. But having said that, one of the red lines was being able to pay back our investors in full.
Oh, that's a good red line to pay people back. So now we're at that point where we're going to talk about Cube. So now we're at the point where we're going to start whiteboarding things out. We were talking about Cube and that semantic layer. So would you mind whiteboarding out what Cube is for us?
Sure. And I guess it probably makes sense to explain like the wider context of why you might use Cube. So there's been a fair bit of talk around medallion architecture. So with medallion architecture, you end up with a bunch of what you'd call bronze or like raw tables. And these then get transformed, usually like 1-to-1, into like cleaned up silver tables, which are suitable to use by people, but they're not necessarily easy to use. Like, you need to know how they join together, and you need to know how to aggregate different columns in order to get metrics. And then because of that, what happens is people often make gold layer tables. And so these are like big, wide tables with lots of dimensions that you can then aggregate your, revenue metric or whatever, what have you. But in doing this, you've really fixed the grain of this table. So this table is then fixed by whatever set of dimensions you've chosen. So maybe because you've built this table, and it's similar to the concept of an OLAP cube that people will have seen before, you fixed it at, say, whatever these 5 dimensions might be. So maybe that's, country, maybe it's date, maybe it's channel, product, currency, right? So you fixed it by these grains. And what that means is whenever someone wants to know something new in that gold layer, you have to make an adjustment to that table. You have to rerun your data. It's expensive. It's slow. It frustrates stakeholders. But it's kind of been what people have done in order to deal with the complexity of Silver and to also reduce the cost of querying Silver directly. Now, what a semantic layer does is, instead of forcing you to join in gold, it just kind of says, well, I'm going to describe how to use Silver. So I'm going to say, orders joins to order items. And, this is one to many. So you kind of explain the relationship and how it should be joined. And it joins on order ID, which is the primary key of this table, but order item ID is the primary key of this table. And then you might have like a products table, and this is like an inner join, one-to-one mapping. And so because of that, you're not actually running this data. You're not actually storing it joined like you have in the gold layer. You're actually just saying this is how it could be joined, and this is the dimensions orders have, and this is the dimensions order items have, and this is the dimensions products have, and then also these are the measures that these have. So maybe revenue comes from orders, and average item price comes from order items, and maybe stock level is defined on the product. And because you're defining how these are calculated and not just actually calculating them, what happens is that you have this idea of a compiler. And the compiler, I'm going to give it a slightly different symbol, takes a request, and that could be, I want, revenue by month for product X. And then that compiler uses the metadata from this model that you've defined in Cube, and then compiles an executable query against your silver data. And therefore, you don't need a gold fixed or OLAP cube with the semantic layer. You can just go straight to your relational data model, and the semantic layer compiler will compile any request into a suitable executable query against that silver layer. And what that means is you don't always have to make changes to answer different questions. The 5 dimensions available in that gold table could be like 50 exposed in this data model here at the bottom, because you don't have to materialize all of those dimensions. It's upon request. And what that means is it's a much more flexible model. You don't have to do so much maintenance. You can and also the other thing is, with that gold table, you still have to know how to query it in order to know how to sum revenue. Maybe it's summing a column and filtering by a few others to get the right revenue metric, and so you have to know how to do that, and that there isn't actually a way to codify that necessarily. So often that results in analysts like knowing how to query that gold table, or it might be in like a dashboard where someone has defined in the metric of the dashboard how to use that and define revenue, but that doesn't go anywhere else. It's not stored centrally. It's not reusable. It's not composable. And so that's the problem with that kind of gold part of the medallion architecture that's become kind of famous these days. Whereas if you replace it with a semantic layer, you get a lot more flexibility. You get governance, because no one's writing the query over and over again to calculate revenue. That's codified once in your semantic layer, and then it's requested, and then the compiler uses the definition to calculate every time. And so you get a huge amount of benefit of governance from that too.
Sure. So if you look there at the bottom there's a, if you ever need to point to something, you can circle it there with a laser pointer. So
Okay.
Personally, I've never been a fan of the bronze, silver, gold sort of setup. I think it's just too many hoops, too many levels of obfuscation. But at the same time, if I were sitting here and I'm thinking like perhaps a data engineer, a software engineer, is the difference between here and here is just another level of abstraction. That
Yes.
Whenever we want to solve some problem, we just add another level of abstraction.
Yeah.
why shouldn't I just use, let's say, views? Let's say I'm using, I don't know, MySQL. And okay, let's have a view. That view changes this. Why not just do that?
So the views end up having similar problems to gold because, and we've worked on this recently as well, where we've kind of helped people automatically build views as like a secondary way of using a semantic layer, but it's not ideal. The problem with the view is, yes, you could build a view that joins all the silver tables together that you need for a given use case, but then it ends up being this very maximal wide table with hundreds of columns. You still then also need to know how to query it. So yeah, the fact that it's a wide view may mean it's not performant, firstly. Secondly, you still need to know how to query it. You still need to know, I need to sum this column from this view and filter it by 3 different things in order to define revenue. And there's no way of codifying how to calculate metric or measure in standard SQL. That's why the compiler of the semantic layer is so important, is because with the metadata that you define here and the compiler, you don't need to know how to query the data model. You just need to know how to request it.
Okay, so this compiler, this is a pretty key part of it.
Yes.
Who wrote that compiler?
So yeah, Cube engineers have written that compiler. They've been, and it's actually the hardest part of building a semantic layer is the compiler and getting it to write the exactly correct query in any given circumstance. They've been working on it since 2019, 2018, and they've never stopped working on it. They've kept adding and adding and adding to it and enhancing it in different ways. But yes, this compiler is absolutely the key.
Okay.
And without a compiler, I don't think you have a true semantic layer. What you end up having is just a knowledge graph.
And you mentioned that knowledge graph concept before. Tell me more about that knowledge graph. We could go to a different whiteboard if you want to describe out that difference of the knowledge graph.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like if you think about this data model, this is a knowledge graph, right? You're saying we have an object in our business world called orders, and we have another object which is the item of the order, and we have another object which is the product. So those are you're kind of some people call this an ontology, but you're kind of describing things that exist inside the business world. The difference is that the semantic layer always maps those things to like data structures. And then because they map them to data structures and they also define how to use them with each other, you can then have a compiler which prevents you having to know how to write a given query and access the data structure. And that's the joy. So every semantic layer is a knowledge graph, but not every knowledge graph is a semantic layer.
Exactly. And you talked about one of the queries here, a more difficult query where you were talking about just a knowledge graph wouldn't know how to do revenue by month. But you're saying this compiler, it would know how to do revenue by month. Is that correct?
Exactly, because you've defined revenue here, and you may have defined it, as, some amount for the order, and you might say filtered by customer is not test. And this has definitely happened to me in my career. This is there, it's codified. That's runnable code in the semantic layer. So then the compiler takes that, takes this definition. And so when it constructs the query, when asked for revenue, it will always use that definition.
I see. So it doesn't know about dates. You would have to put in something about dates that would be
exactly
outside of this.
I mean, there's elements by which some things are easy enough to automate it parsing, like dates, for example, could be one, but often silver tables might have like 2 or 3 dates. And so you'd have to explain what the right date to use would be.
Okay. Now, one big question I'm seeing here is how or can you run queries across multiple databases?
Yeah, so with a semantic layer, it is possible to have, and people do this for multi-tenancy typically, where they
Would you mind
have.
drawing that out? Let's go to whiteboard
Yeah,
2, and
sure.
if you could draw that out.
So what might happen is you have, say, customer 1, customer 2, customer 3, and they've all got a database of their own. Schema is the same. And so what you can do is the compiler, let's call it this, depending on the requests, will route the query and compile the query for the correct database. So you can have like templating logic to say, oh, if it's customer 1, use this Postgres. If it's customer 2, use this MySQL. If it's customer 3, use this Snowflake. So you can do that.
And what about let's say let's say you have a table that's instead of this being a separate customer, it's all the same company, but this is marketing's data, this is product data, this is our CRM. Could you do a join across those separate databases?
It is possible. We don't really do federated querying in that sense. Like that's what you'd use something like Trino for. But one thing you can do is if we go to another page.
Okay, we'll go to 3.
Yeah. So what you could do there is, rather than it being so marketing and they have their own database, maybe it's BigQuery, and then you've got product on Postgres, and then you've got, I don't know, finance on SQL Server. So the schemas here are different. So what would happen is you would define like model in all of these. And then what you could do is, we have a concept called pre-aggregation, where if you do want to have like a hot data set that's very, very fast to access, you can pre-aggregate. And then if a query uses all of these together, it can join them. So that's it's not really what Cube is designed for, but you can do it using this method.
Where are these pre-aggregations stored? Are they stored on this database or are they stored in Cube?
No, so they're actually stored in Cube. So we have a market leading, like, I guess you could call it an OLAP cache, but it's also it's built on data fusion, and you can build and store like pre-aggregations and caches of data and use them together inside a single query.
Okay. How would query invalidation work in that then? Or excuse me,
Yeah.
cache invalidation?
Yeah, so the way it would work is you could select either, like, let's say you have the same queries hitting, but you want it to invalidate after a certain time. You can set the time for that pre-aggregation to invalidate. The other way is, just the normal way of missing it. So if a query has, for example, a different timestamp compared to what you've aggregated or cached, then you'd miss it, and then it would run. You'd run the query back down to, back down through the models into there. because you'd still use the model that you defined in Cube, but because you don't have the data inside the cache, it would then have to draw it back up again.
And the other possibility would be that something marketing has changed some field, some row in there that invalidates what we've cached here. But you're assuming that there isn't that sort of change happening. Is that correct?
I mean, we're not assuming. I think we are ready for that eventuality as well. But typically, what happens is, especially when you think about the timelines of the cache invalidation, is that hasn't happened.
Okay. Oh, the timelines are pretty short then.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So your cache misses, it sounds like, would be relatively frequent, and this doesn't sound like Q's bread and butter anyway.
No, like what's more common for us is like one data store, and then we still have the cache, and the cache just saves the company a lot of time. Like, so for example, we have a customer case study out there with a company called Security Scorecard. They were using Snowflake as their data warehouse and serving a data product for their customers. When they put Cube on top and pre-aggregated some data sets, but also gained the benefit of our cache, when some queries hit the cache, they halved their Snowflake spend using Cube. And even the total cost of Cube and Snowflake was half of what it was just using Snowflake.
Yeah, it's as much as the Snowflake people push back on their costs, it is pricey, and anything you can do to reduce those costs is good.
Yeah, I mean, the typical Snowflake sales engineer would be, it's not expensive, you just have to use it properly. And I think, if you are running lots of similar queries, having a cache is using it properly. So yeah, I think Snowflake and Cube together is like a pretty great combination.
Would you put that out there as a best practice of putting Cube in front of Snowflake then?
Yeah, and not just Snowflake. Like we work with a lot of Databricks folks, a lot of BigQuery folks as well. And yeah, they get the benefit of both lower cost and higher performance.
And to be clear, your average reader of this OLAP cache is probably not a dashboard, but it probably, or I should say, it probably is a dashboard, probably not something else. Probably.
Yeah, it's either going to be like a dashboard in a BI tool that will hit that cache very frequently because they're using the same queries. Like, so imagine like it's Monday morning, people come in, open the same dashboard. Once that query is run it might have already run like at 3 a.m. on the data once it was ready, because you can orchestrate having your pre-aggregations run ahead of time with Cube. They then hit that pre-aggregation over and over again, like hundreds of times in that morning when everyone's looking at the dashboard, and that's great. It doesn't incur any extra data warehouse cost. And it's very, very snappy. So that's exactly how you see it. But the other situation is where we have many customers who have what you'd call a data product, where they built their own thing in like JavaScript, TypeScript, React, and they're then using our APIs to expose data where they've built a custom interface for their customers. So the security scorecard was one of those examples. But yes, it still looks somewhat like a dashboard often.
And is this cache, is this a distributed system, or I should say, is all of Cube a distributed system with?
Yes. Yeah, so you can scale up and down.
Okay, would you mind diagramming that out on 4, please?
That's probably like a part where so the way it works is Cube has this concept of workers. And so then you have like load from requests. And when this gets too big, you just spin up another worker to share the load. And that's roughly how Cube would work for anything. And that's how we deal with and so we have some people who have like either a gigantic data set in Cube Store, which was where we had those caches and pre-aggregations, or they just have a lot of volume and then the workers need to be higher in volume as well.
But there's some sort of state that needs to be out here somewhere. What is that state, or where's that state kept? So that
Not
would be state like things like the actual semantic definition that's out
Yeah,
there.
so that's then if you think about it, that's almost like the compilation of that. So if you think about the compiler being here and the semantic layer model, that's in code really. Uh, so the so usually when a cube instance spins up, it just recompiles that and it's pretty fast.
But where is that model stored? So is this stored in a relational database? Is this model stored in on S3, for example?
Um, I mean, because of the way that people develop in Cube as well, when they open up a Cube instance to develop, it compiles the code on the fly, and then
Oh, I see. So it's generating out some sort of Python code, I guess.
so I think what would happen is, so this is where I'm a bit less familiar, is that the worker itself would compile the code and then store the compiled data in maybe something like Postgres. But it's not stateful because if the worker goes down, it doesn't matter. The next worker can just compile again.
Yeah. So I more than likely there's some sort of either database out here where as these workers come up, they're querying into that database, or perhaps it's a shared file
Yeah.
somewhere. But there's some sort of shared state that's coming in from here that these are using. Okay, well that makes sense. So now going to 5, you mentioned that when you were at I'm blanking on the name of the company you were at. Granite? No, not Granite. The company before Cube.
Delphy Labs.
Delphi, thank you, Delphy Labs. That you were often using semantic layers to do the AI. Would you mind diagramming out
Yeah.
what that usage of AI plus the semantic layer looks like?
So if you think about over here, you've got a user and they have a question. And that question then comes to our, I guess you'd call this a retrieval augmented generation step. And what this is taking is, we often used Cube when we were at Delphi. It was our favorite semantic layer anyway. It would then take metadata from Cube. And when I say metadata, it's kind of like the objects in Cube. So if you've defined orders, if you've defined revenue, if you've defined those things in Cube, they're then available in this RAG to answer the question. And so that's like at a bare minimum what the RAG has. So then the question comes with these metadata objects, and then this system will then output back to the user. It's kind of like it's going to be. Actually, sorry, I'm going to undo that. It's then going to go this way, and it's going to provide an answer. But with the answer, you get like the bag of metadata. So let's say the question was revenue for last month by product. So then it's going to say, here is orders dot revenue by order date month by products dot name, for example. And so it's taken, so these terms are all from the semantic layer. So it's kind of like it's ordering from a menu. It doesn't know how to calculate these. It's just naively relying on the semantic layer's metadata to know how to answer the question. And so what that means is these metadata objects are actually much closer to language than having to write SQL and knowing what's in a schema. If you've and I've done this a few times for customers, is if you define these objects with clean names, good descriptions, dissimilar names to each other, this actually it finds these objects really well according to the question. Even if the question doesn't use the exact terms that are in the semantic layer, it finds them very well. But it's also transparent because it's said what it's using from the semantic layer. And what's in the semantic layer are terms that your business is familiar with. And so, let's imagine that they didn't want order revenue and they wanted like supply chain revenue or something else where it's a bit different to the view of revenue that orders have, and maybe orders are owned by finance or something rather than logistics. And so then you could say, well, actually, I didn't want these. I wanted these other versions. And it would then be able to go back to the semantic layer and look for those and find them. The other thing that's also good is it doesn't need to, it doesn't need to guess, right? If it doesn't have these things available to it from the metadata objects, it just will say, I can't answer the question. And so that's like a feature, not a bug for me. Whereas the text to SQL tools that go straight to the database, so the database is here, right? That's there, but Cube is the only thing that interacts with it. And so then this answer is determined, like the actual SQL is deterministically compiled by Cube. So that's not down to luck or probability from a LLM generating it. It's the requests that the RAG system has made of Cube, and that request, which is like a JSON, is then compiled into executable SQL. So you could have a very simple request. Like it could just be revenue in the measures object of the JSON, and then month and product in the dimensions object of the JSON. That's like a really small 3 or 4 line JSON, goes into the Cube compiler, and Cube might say, well, that's actually it's a very complicated measure, but that's fine because it's deterministically compiled. The SQL could be 200 lines, and that's fine. It's not going to get it wrong because from the request to the SQL is deterministic.
I see. So just to be clear, this product, or I should say, this part of the product does not exist in Cube. This is something that you would have to write yourself. Is that correct?
No. So we have. So this is what we built when we were at Delphi, and then since we joined Cube, we've built this in 2 different products. So we have Cube AI API and AI Assistant. They both work in a very similar way, except the API doesn't have a front end, and the Assistant has a front end in our Cube Cloud product.
I see. Okay, so that's interesting. So that's part of why this deterministic, for people not understanding what he means by this deterministic compiler, it's actually pretty important that if you do the same sort of query here, that you get the same sort of SQL, so that if you have 2 people, let's say you have your CEO and your VP of sales doing the same query, that you would get the same result. If they're not getting the same result, you have a different problem.
Yeah. And you don't want, I wouldn't want an LLM deciding what my data meant on the fly. If you ever, because with those text to SQL systems, it's not only defining how to query the data, it's defining what the data means. And so that doesn't happen with the system. What the data means is codified in your semantic layer. So it doesn't get to decide that, it just gets to request it.
So is there an LLM in this diagram somewhere?
Yeah, so the LLM is inside the RAG box, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. So right here, there's an LLM, so large language model like ChatGPT, Llama. Can you tell me which model it is? Is it Llama or
It
something?
depends on the customer. So our typical one that we use is GPT-4o at the moment. It's kind of got a nice balance of power and speed. But we also can get it to work with Claude 3.5 Sonnet. That works very well as well. And so some customers, typically if they're on AWS and only want us to use AWS infrastructure, they can use Claude 3.5 Sonnet via Bedrock, and so we can use it that way. And actually, generally speaking, now I think people either have access to an Anthropic model like Sonnet or an OpenAI model like GPT-4o, because if you're on Azure, you've got the access to the OpenAI ones, or you might have your own access to it. Or if you're on AWS or GCP, you have access to the Anthropic models. And also, what we're seeing is a lot of the other providers like Snowflake and whoever else who offer access to LLMs also have access to Anthropic's models.
I would love for Gemini.
We haven't tried it for a while. Some of our learnings are from when we were building Delphi and which ones worked. So when we were building Delphi, Gemini didn't work as well, but it's been through a number of iterations. In Cube, we also have a Copilot which helps people write modeling code. And in that, we use Gemini quite heavily. It's pretty, because we want that to be really fast, and the Gemini Flash is it's economical, it's fast, it's pretty good at that kind of use case. So we use either Gemini Flash or Gemini Pro typically there. We're also a GCP company, so that we have easy access to them. Yeah, we haven't used the Gemini models for this process for a while, but yeah, I think I'd love to try the Gemini 2 models family, see how well it does.
I've been having good success with them. I've been trying them out lately, and
Yeah.
and at least 1.5 is quite good. But I think what you're bringing up here is a very common thing that I'm saying, is that there isn't one. Companies aren't just on one LLM. They'll do something with this LLM here, something with this LLM here, and then what I'm also saying is that the changes between them. So let's say you started doing Gemini versus Anthropic, Claude, Sonnet. I'm finding that the prompts actually have to be different between them, and that's kind of a weird thing that's happening there.
Yeah, that's part of the problem of it's not just plugging in a model. You actually have to change the prompting that you might use, and a LangChain supposedly helps with that, but it doesn't help with the fact that the way you have to instruct the model is different for each given model. We'd love to try some of the open source ones. So Llama 3.3 models are supposed to be pretty good. And, someone, I think there was Simon Willison wrote about a model called Quen 2.5. So it's a 70 billion parameter model that in theory I could run on my Mac. If you have 64 gig of RAM, you can run it locally, but it's supposed to be about at the same level as GPT-4o on tool use and code generation. So I'm interested in some of these, but it's just actually standing them up, changing your prompting is actually not trivial.
It's true. It's becoming a full-time job, if not more so, just to keep up with these various models and try them out.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that becomes a title. I don't think it's AI engineer. I think it's somebody who just, or maybe it's a test suite that you have where there's a test suite that you run through them.
People have been calling it AI ops, ML, similar to ML ops, like AI ops. But yeah.
Okay. And so this is available now. This as AI API and API assistant or AI assistant.
Yeah, so they're available in public preview right now. So yeah, we have customers testing it today.
Interesting. Okay. And okay, so you get back your answer over here, and you're able to go through and understand it. Good. Okay. Well, so let's go to 6. And would you mind telling me what you're most excited about on the roadmap? And it can't be the one that we just talked about.
So when we've got pretty deep into testing things like AI API with some of our customers, and they've then found like some of the edges that need like smoothing. And so one of these things is where, let's say, someone asks the question like, show me GitHub stars for DuckDB, right? Now, DuckDB is not an object that would be in a semantic layer. It's the value of an inside a dimension, right? So the actual dimension would be like, I don't know, software or project or something. But they haven't referred to that object in the question. And so these questions can become a bit difficult to answer. And so the only way, there's no magic. The only way to actually solve this is to store the answers for some dimensions that you'd probably, because people don't do this with every dimension, because not everyone knows the values for every dimension. It's only when it's like commonly known values. So like you might do this for something like marketing channel as well. But with marketing channel, there's often about 10 if for any given company. And you can actually put that in the description for a field in Cube, and our LLM will pick it up, and it works fine. Is that the problem is when there's possibly thousands of these values that people actually will refer to by name. And so therefore, we need to end up storing these or retrieving them at the point at which we create the query, so that we say, okay, well, what is DuckDB? Well, we don't think DuckDB is a dimensional measure in Cube. We think it's actually a value of a dimension. What dimensions have you elected to make searchable for us? Oh, you've elected for software as a dimension or software name to be searchable for us. So we'll run a search on that and say, well, what values in here look like DuckDB? Oh, we found 3, and we'll put that into retrieval augmented generation with the pairing with the dimension name, and therefore the query we generate, the request we'll generate will have the correct, like it will have not just the dimension, but it will be dimension equals DuckDB. It's like software name equals DuckDB. So it's actually like one of the harder things to solve.
Okay, and so this is going to be a product or a new feature that's going to be part of the AI that you just talked about.
We released like a first version of that like yesterday. So very fresh. So we've got some people hopefully we'll try it out in the new year. So I'm really excited to see what comes of that. One of the other things we're working on at Cube that I'm really interested in is we have a community Slack, and there's a lot of questions come in from that Slack, and a lot of them are actually like answerable through knowledge of our docs. But because our docs are now like somewhat big, because we've added more and more things you can do in Cube, it's not as easy to exactly understand how to approach something from the docs. So we're trying to build like an AI agent that can use the docs along with previously well answered questions to help people know how to do something in Cube. Like they might say, well, how do I do a rolling window measure in Cube? And they might describe the scenario and the fields, and we'd maybe come back with a code snippet and say you could do it like this. Like that's one thing that we're looking to release really soon, both in that community Slack but also in Cube Cloud for customers to use.
Please tell me you're going to name it the RTFM bot.
Well, what does that stand for?
Read the.
Oh yeah. I wanted to call it Rubik.
Why Rubik?
Rubik's Cube. Yeah, that's
okay.
I'm not sure I would be allowed to though.
Well, now to kind of round out this conversation, At first, when I read through your LinkedIn profile, I had the same problem you did of looking at it and saying, "Oh, somebody made this jump from a very business focused, very analyst focused into an AI highly technical thing." But what I realized is that, as you rightly pointed out, you just had the wrong title. What suggestions would you give to other people with the wrong title to be able to make it and make that switch and start moving up?
So the world has changed a bit from the last time I did a normal job interview process where I didn't have the right title. And now the recruiters are being told by some AI or ML system that these CVs that have come in are the ones that you should look at. So sometimes the recruiters don't even view applications themselves. They'll view them after they've been selected to be viewed. And so you then have this problem where if your CV doesn't look like vector similar to the job enough or doesn't have enough of the things that the job needs, you you don't you won't get found. And so what I've seen some people do is, like, let's say they were called head of e-commerce portfolio pricing, right? They would then put in brackets VP of data, right? And because it's there, suddenly that title, which doesn't sound like VP of data from a vector point of view, does look like VP of data from a vector point of view. And but when a human looks at it, it's not dishonest. And you weren't trying to be dishonest. You were trying to just express what you were actually doing in that job in short. Because just because you describe it in the body of like that role in your CV doesn't mean it will be picked up properly. So there's like something I would definitely do. Like always try and like bracket the role that you are actually doing, like from an industry standard term, especially if it's the standard term of the jobs that you're applying for. Like, so maybe you are working as an analytics engineer, say, or a data engineer, but your job title is something like weird, like finance analyst or something, which is very common that they end up working in that kind of capacity. And so then you can say, finance analyst, data engineer, or analytics engineer in brackets. Then you can go through your CV and describe the things that you were doing and how they relate to that activity, which is the job you're applying for. And then suddenly your CV does look vector similar to someone who just was working as an analytics engineer and who has the same stuff on the CV.
Okay. And one of the other things I valued about your experience was that you've ran data teams. So, what advice would you give to other data team managers?
Um, yeah, that's a big topic. I've written a lot about that in my Substack. Um, I think the big one that I think I'd go for is hiring. Like, if you get hiring right, everything else becomes easy. If you get hiring wrong, things go wrong quickly. And I've been lucky in that before I actually started hiring people, my line manager at the time said, "Well, you've not done this before. Perhaps you should get some training on like managing and hiring people." So Worldpay at the time was a large enough company that it had a big learning and development program, and in it I had manager development. And I went on a few different things like recruiting, leading, managing, and all of the different and understanding the differences between those things. And then I also had him mentoring me, and so he was very helpful to me in at that point in my career, which was just before I became a line manager. So, firstly, yeah, if you think about going left to right, recruit and recruit really well. And where that's gone wrong for me is typically when I've joined a company and someone's been hired to start with me in my team, and often that's not done very well because it's not the person who hired that person is either leaving or they're not looking after your team once you join. So invariably they aren't paying attention to that hiring process as well as you would. And that's where I've ended up having to let people go from time to time because they had the wrong attitude or they actually pretty much always has been the wrong kind of attitude. And so that comes on to how I would hire is like often I've hired people whose attitude I really like, their desire to learn, their desire to do right things in business and to interact with people and to solve problems. That's what their desires are. And it doesn't matter that they didn't know, like I've been hiring analytics engineers before, and they didn't have to know DBT, which is like supposedly the main tool of an analytics engineer. They just needed to know SQL because I knew like that's a raw skill that lots of people have, that if they know well, they can then translate to DBT and other analytics engineering activities. And so like you try and limit what you're saying their technical skill should be and their years of experience should be. Like often I see these things where people say, oh, I need them to have 10 years experience. Like, firstly, that tool hasn't been around for 10 years. So why are you asking for 10 years experience? And secondly, you don't need 10 years of experience for someone to be competent enough with that skill. So, be minimal in in those hard skills that you're asking for, so that you can cast a wider net, and also you don't put off people, because some people will still have a go if they don't meet all of the criteria exactly. Some people won't, and then you put them off, and they can be really good people. And then actually when you hire them, test for cultural fit, test for attitude as like the priority, and that's the place not to compromise. You can compromise a bit more on them being technically less able, because people with the right attitude and desire will catch up.
Okay, very good advice. Thank you. Well, David, I really appreciate you coming on the show. You've shared so openly, and I really appreciate you doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been good.